Hey guys, it's Paradise, and what if we told you Monster Hunter Wilds on PC may be a problem for you? A big point of contention in the community lately has been over the minimum and recommended specs for the PC version of Monster Hunter Wilds due to some very high requirements and some specifics that are mentioned that have people worried about how it will perform on their machines. So while we aren't PC hardware experts, we didn't just want to make a top-level video yapping about this issue, we wanted to dive into the specifics of why and what this technology means, and if you have some good technical knowledge yourself, then sound off in the comments with any additional notes to add, and guys, don't shoot the messenger here, we're simply trying to be a voice for everyone concerned about these specs, and give an insight into what it all means. Also, this will be a very talking-heavy video, so we're going to have trailers, gameplay, and of course the specs in the background. So this is more something to listen to and ponder over. I also want to point out Capcom have never been that great at optimizing their open world games, particularly on PC releases. Just look at the launch for Monster Hunter World on PC with its various memory leak issues. Even Rise's PC launch had its own issues despite it performing a bit better than World. And of course, recently Dragon's Dogma 2, which definitely had some issues, particularly in the main city areas, tanking FPS fairly low. But Wilds is trying something new and is doing even more than any of these previous titles, with a big, seamless world, hordes and packs of monsters, and a lot going on the screen. So we need to talk about these specifications, what's going on, and what this means. So here you can see the minimum requirements. This is for upscale 1080p with a targeted 30 FPS on the lowest graphics settings. So I don't want to linger on this because you don't really want to be here anyway. But in my opinion, you do at least want to be on the recommended specs, which you can see here. And this is targeting 1080p, 60 FPS with frame generation enabled, and medium graphics settings. Now with those stats in mind, you may be confused when you see a 40 series Nvidia card, an RX 60 series AMD card, and more that we'll get through in this video. Now, your initial impression of this may be that there are other games that are just as expansive and graphically impressive, so you may be surprised as to why the recommended specs here are much higher for Monster Hunter Wilds compared to these other games. But what you need to take note of is that other games outside of Capcom's own IPs will be running on different game engines. For example, Red Dead Redemption 2, another good-looking, massively open-world game, runs on Rockstar's own advanced game engine, while recent Capcom games run on the RE engine, or going all the way back to Monster Hunter World, it used MT Framework, which was pre-RE engine being ready. You see, the RE engine was first developed in 2014 and is still being constantly updated to this day, and you can see here all of the RE engine games that Capcom have made, from the first game when it was ready to release with a title in 2017, all the way to 2024 and beyond. So the question is, why are the specs higher for this than other similar massive open games with a lot going on? Well, as we said, RE Engine started development in 2014 and released in a game for the first time in 2017. But notice that a majority of these games are not massively expansive open world games, which likely wasn't the goal of the RE Engine's development team at the time. This is likely why the requirements are fairly high for Wilds, as the engine itself isn't geared towards massive seamless games compared to the other games running on engines specifically designed for that purpose. So the reality of it is, for a game like Wilds that is pushing the boundaries, being massive and seamless with a lot going on, it would have massively benefited from running on the new updated next-gen RE Next engine, or by having components of the engine developed and geared towards larger, more expansive titles. So the things required to optimize open world games on PC just isn't ready, but if the RE Next engine is developed with these things in mind and Wilds were to have launched on it, we would likely see a very different set of recommended PC specs. And to put it simply, Capcom are already working on this with their R&D team working on the RE Next engine. They've identified some of the constraints of the RE engine, and as such have put measures in place, like getting new high-end PCs for their engine developers, moving all of their project assets over to newer SSDs, and much more with things like cloud saving for their development. To put it simply, they are already undergoing the development of their new engine, which is Arekkz or RE Next. And along with this comes a bunch of new technology, as you can see here on the screen, so this is something Capcom are already working on. But the simple matter of fact is, this is not ready for Monster Hunter Wilds release, so of course Wilds is launching on just the RE engine instead. Realistically, it would be a much better scenario if RE Next was already ready and Wilds launched with it, but that's just not how this has panned out. So this is a core reason as to why I believe the specs are pretty high here, because the RE Next engine just hasn't been ready in time for Wilds launch. So let's go through these recommended specs and go over what it all means and why. We can start with the resolution, which is at 1080p, and to be honest, this isn't where someone like me wants to be. As you may know, a lot of our videos are 4K, so we like to play in 2 or 4K preferably, so that means you're going to need an even more beastie PC than the specs listed here if you want to go higher than 1080p. For the FPS, you can see it lists 60, but this is with frame generation enabled. The way that frame generation works is essentially by leveraging AI technology to inject sort of virtual frames between your actual rendered frames, giving you a much smoother and higher FPS experience than what is actually being rendered by the game. Since we're on the topic of the frame generation, we need to talk about the graphics cards next, as this is what will enable you to use frame generation, or FSR, which is AMD's open source upscaling technology, kind of like an equivalent to frame generation, but interestingly isn't limited to just AMD cards as it's open source. This means you will be able to use the Fidelity FX Super Resolution, or FSR, on other cards and older cards than even the ones listed here. For example, FSR is natively supported on AMD GPUs, starting from the Polaris architecture, which is the 400 series, all the way to the latest RDNA 2 and RDNA 3 cards, such as the RX 5000, 6000, and 7000 series. But despite it being an AMD technology, it's also supported on older Nvidia cards like the 10 series, 30 series, and even 40 series. And it's even in Intel GPUs and game consoles like the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series S and X. And this is because for those consoles they use custom AMD RDNA 2 based hardware. But something to note about frame generation technology is that it does actually add some input latency, which for an action game simply isn't an ideal solution if it is required for that smooth 60 FPS experience. Now here's the thing, Monster Hunter Wilds is definitely pushing the boundaries, especially for Capcom games, with just how much is going on the screen and how much is loaded in at one time with the massive seamless world and high density of creatures, monsters, and all that kind of stuff. So the GPUs that are listed here, like the RTX 4060 or the 2070 Super, or even the RX 6700 XT, all enables the use of these new AI technologies that allows for a much smoother gaming experience, with the 40 series cards having access to Nvidia's DLSS 3, which is a whole suite of tools that enable you to basically get much better performance, even when the game is running on a lower resolution and FPS due to things like upscaling and of course frame generation, while the AMD card will be leveraging the FSR, doing effectively the same thing as frame generation. These type of GPUs are basically required for a game like Monster Hunter Wilds, where they're going to need to make use of these modern graphical techniques like ray tracing, the aforementioned frame generation, and FSR, due to the complex assets, high-resolution textures, detailed 3D models, the expansive world, and the rapid load transitions of the seamless world. And this is also why an SSD is listed as required, because that has significantly faster read and write speeds compared to traditional hard disk drives. Some games even store critical data in RAM, and having an SSD is also needed due to their very high read speeds, allowing you to access that information rapidly, which massively reduces the risk of stuttering or freezing when actually playing the game. This is why something like Star Citizen also requires an SSD, because if you play it on a hard disk drive, you're just going to stutter all over the place as it just can't read that information fast enough. On top of this, you can see that the GPU's VRAM requirement is 8 GB. And again, this is essential to handling large textures and high-resolution models like they have in Monster Hunter Wilds. Or it could just be the highly detailed environments of the large seamless world and other assets, which again helps reduce loading issues, stuttering, and crashes, So they are recommending 8GB of VRAM in your GPU here, which again is more of a standard in modern GPUs but might be a problem if you have an older GPU. This is further backed up by them listing direct storage support, which is a feature that allows you to reduce load speeds by offloading data transfer tasks directly to your GPU, reducing that bottleneck on your CPU. This, combined with a SSD, allows a game to run significant amounts of data fairly dynamically and much faster than you would otherwise be able to do. The memory requirement of 16GB is fairly standard this time, just don't have any Chrome tabs open while playing Wilds, and the CPUs may surprise you, listing i5s and Ryzen 5s, which isn't too insane sounding, especially considering many previous Capcom games on PC have been CPU bound, such as Dragon's Dogma 2, where the city would absolutely chonk your FPS due to all of the things going on in that area, which may make you wonder why they aren't suggesting a higher and more expensive CPU here. There will likely be many things running in the background, like all of the packs of monsters, their AI, the endemic life and other animals that are all being constantly processed, requiring a lot of CPU processing speed. This means having a higher tier CPU will probably give you better performance than a higher GPU in this instance, but I imagine they can get away with suggesting an i5 and Ryzen 5s because of the leveraging of the GPU's frame generation and it only being on medium settings. As well as having an SSD with direct storage supported enables you to do all of this crazy seamless open world stuff without it all going through the CPU. And so this is why these specs are fairly high for a 1080p medium setting game, because they need to leverage ray tracing, frame generation, and the other suite of AI features that enables you to basically run a game better than it otherwise would. So all of these systems in the game, with it being a massive, persistent, and dense world, is why the specs are so high, due to the team's vision for Monster Hunter Wilds with weather events, packs of monsters, and seamless zones. If the RE Next engine is being developed with these types of games in mind, this might not be as big of an issue as it is here in future Capcom titles. Now, console players may be thinking they've dodged a bullet here, but I just want to point out we have played the game on PlayStation 5 consoles, although they were probably dev kit consoles, meaning they would have had additional RAM and even higher CPU power. And even on those consoles, it was still a variable 30 FPS, which may have been in graphical mode, and we know from the recent PlayStation technical presentation with the PlayStation 5 Pro that most players actually just play on performance mode anyway. So hopefully on PlayStations in performance mode it will perform better, but there is a slight worry there for your variable 30 FPS on consoles too. Now, we do have the PlayStation 5 Pro on the horizon, which may help with the performance, but if the CPU is the bottleneck, then it likely won't help that massively, because the CPU hasn't been the focus of the upgrade of the PlayStation 5 Pro compared to the base PS5, whereas the GPU has. Well, I hope this gave you a much better understanding of why the specs are as they are for Monster Hunter Wilds and what it means and what this technology is doing in order to run Wilds at a sort of reasonable 60 FPS, which might be a problem for people with lower end graphics cards that can't make use of Nvidia's DLSS 3, but hopefully your card will still have access to AMD's open source FSR. Either way, we'll have to wait until the game's release to see what the performance is actually like, as Capcom have been listening to the feedback and responding. But it really isn't acceptable for a new game like this to release in 2025 with a poor PC launch. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a perfect example of this, where it should have just performed much better on PC, and that kind of soured the launch of it for many players. But hope isn't lost, because Capcom have listened and updated Dragon's Dogma 2 on PC since its launch, which, although we haven't tried it ourselves, Digital Foundry have done some great testing and benchmarking, showing how it's dramatically improved. So I really hope Capcom listen and make changes this time to ensure a smooth and exciting PC launch for Wilds. Do you agree that they need to listen to the feedback, and what do you think about all of this? Drop a like if you enjoyed this sort of interesting chat about PC specs, and make sure you're subscribed below, because we'll have more Monster Hunter Wilds and videos on your favorite games coming very, very soon.